Welcome to the viewing room. We're going to be discussing Band of Brothers, which was released September 9th, 2001. Think about that date. Today I have Mark Pellegrino, Jennifer Bouani, and Jacqueline Schumann, and we're going to be talking about the cultural impact, the historical context, the acting, the aesthetics, all with the purpose of helping you get a better experience. Now, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you see it, or you could have everything spoiled and then go see it if you want. That's fine too. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start off with a quick little synopsis here so you get oriented to what we're going to be discussing. Band of Brothers, released 2001, follows Easy Company from their training at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, under Captain Sobel. Follows them all the way to the shores of Normandy on D-Day. From there, the series portrays the unit's role in Operation Market Garden, their experience during the Battle of the Bulge, and their eventual push into Nazi Germany. And throughout the campaign, we see leadership shifts with Lieutenant Winters rising to command of the company, guiding them through the battles and the eventual capture of the Eagle's Nest. That's Hitler's house, basically. The series depicts brutal realities of combat, but also delves into the personal struggles, triumphs, and evolving relationships within the company. It all culminates in the war's end and is a detailed, I think, a great personal, plot-driven exploration of Easy Company's journey through the heart of the winter European theater, during World War II. So now what we're going to do is that's a very broad overview of what's going on in this 10-episode series on HBO. So now we're going to go around the room and we're going to give you our 30-second review. So why don't we start with Jax?
All right. Well, also just for clarity for the super young people out there, this is about World War II. I know we say Normandy in Germany and people are supposed to know that, but I know that I know that my daughter would be like, what war are we talking about? I thought that this is the second time that I've seen the show. I saw it the first time when it actually came out and I was watching it live on HBO. And, but that of course was, 20 plus years ago. And so the second time watching it, the first time I saw it, I was blown away. And the second time I was blown away as well for different reasons. Now coming at it from an artistic point of view, I thought it was an incredibly bold show that touches on just the absolute struggle and grit and terrible fate and gore of war. That does not take a spotlight away, rather shines the spotlight on what this war was, but just war in general. I feel like you could take this and apply it to any other war, and you have kind of the soldier journey, the camaraderie that these brothers have, that these band of brothers have. We band of brothers. The camaraderie that they have is amazing. The loss that they feel is also amazing. The story is I feel it's more. I felt like it was more character over plot, but maybe we can get into that as we go into the weeds more on it. But it was an incredibly touching and compelling series with amazing actors who played their roles, no matter how small they were, because some of them came in for, very, very small roles. You could tell that they each relished the roles that they were playing and really embodied those characters. So I was really impressed with it. I have maybe just a few critiques, but we can get into those a little bit later, but I think that they're just very personal. I don't think that they can be considered objective critiques of the show, but I'll see what everybody else thinks. So that's my overall, and a thumbs up overall.
Jennifer?
Oh, hi. Yeah, you went mute for a minute.
I did.
Yeah, so I give this 2 thumbs up. This goes into one of my top 10 TV shows. I absolutely loved it. I grew up, both of my grandfathers were in World War II. So seems like there was always some kind of World War II show on the TV when I'd go over to their house. My dad loved documentaries. As a girl growing up, you just don't really pay attention to that stuff. And you hear about it through the history books, but this story told it succinctly and beautifully, and not, it wasn't, the characters are amazing, the character arcs are amazing, but the plot is phenomenal. I would say it's one of the best TV plots I've seen. Perfect, just perfect. And so I really couldn't wait to watch it. Hung on every episode. They were all unique and different, and yet put you through the trials and tribulations of this journey, the soldiers and the leaders, and the heartache. And there's themes of leadership in there that are really good. There are very visceral moments that I have to give Spielberg super credit for, where you really can feel their fear and their misery. And yeah, so I'm giving this one 2 thumbs up. Love it. And probably I'll watch it again. And I don't say that about a lot of TV shows.
And thumbs up, thumbs down. I assume thumbs up.
Oh,
She gave it 2 thumbs up.
Oh, she
thumbs
did.
up.
Okay,
That's-
sorry.
yeah.
And then
Yeah.
Mark, your turn.
2. She gave it 2.
2.
I
Okay.
definitely give it a thumbs up. Maybe I could give it 2 thumbs up. It's quite an impressive feat to translate Stephen Ambrose's work, Band of Brothers, into a 10-episode series that follows Easy Company, real people, through the vicissitudes of war. Is a very, very ambitious project. It was ambitious when they took it on, and it's still ambitious today. And the sequel to it, the Pacific, was a very ambitious project. For me, I loved. I don't think this is just a guy thing, so I won't say it like that. The Band of Brothers concept, the idea that you're in a fraternity of men that is bound together by experiences that are unlike anyone else in the world. That it's a hard nut to crack to get into that world, but when you're in it forever and ever and ever. That is a pretty amazing world to see, because it's animated by values that I personally emulate: honor, integrity, courage, loyalty. To see these men love each other so much that they would sneak out of hospitals or go AWOL in order to get back with their company to fight with them. That practically brings tears to my eyes, because it's a level of love that I think most people in a narcissistic generation don't quite understand. So I think it's super important for people, young kids, to see this film, not only to see what spiritually animated the quote unquote greatest generation, which is what they call the World War II generation. There's a reason they call it that, because they need to see these values. They need to see what courage is, what camaraderie is, what teamwork is, and what good and evil are, because you see them in stark contrast in this. And there's some gray areas. There's some very interesting moral problems that surface up in the course of the show, but they're certainly fighting evil, and they're fighting it with everything they got. So anyway, 2 thumbs up. I'll give it 2 thumbs up too, Jennifer.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with 2 thumbs up myself. I also agree with what you're saying, Mark, with the specialness of that bond that they have, which I think most humans don't actually ever experience in that way. And so it's very interesting to see it portrayed, and I think they did a great job portraying it. I also have another personal reason I like it. I mean, my father was in Vietnam. I had grandfather in World War II, great uncle in, Korea. Most of my family was in military. I was the first to not go into the military, actually, from basically both not my mother, but like her whole family chain did, all her brothers, a lot of them did. Like I was pretty much the first who didn't. And I was thinking, watching this and the kind of heroism and valor of these kind of men, but really also what they went through was I have this feeling of, but for the grace of God go I, in a sense. In other words, like that was the life I probably would have had I been born in an earlier generation. And it's easy to like say, oh, that's what we want, but I don't, or like, glorify it to some degree, but I don't want to fight it. Like I'm glad I don't have to fight in a war. And, one of the reasons I don't have to is because of the things that these guys did at that time. And so there's always this feeling of like, wow, when I'm watching and this, I've seen it, I think 5 times, and then I've watched a whole bunch of reaction series, which we could talk about later of this. So I really love this series. I think it brings out a personal side of this era that was not that long ago. We still have a few guys still alive from this era, and it really brings alive history in an important way that I think is very valuable for everyone to see. Okay, so that's our review. So this is World War II. And I don't know how familiar all of you are with World War II history. I have a little bit of knowledge. I'm definitely not an expert, but one of the things I gained from this show as I watched it was learning a little bit more about the things that I had maybe read a little bit about when I was a kid. It made me explore World War II more. And I just wondered, because of the nature of this, the way they did this film, where they had documentary spliced in, especially at the beginning, and they did seem to try to be very historically accurate. I'm curious what your knowledge was going into it, what you thought about the historical context, and if that had an impact on your viewing.
So I could speak a little bit to it. I have I wouldn't say I have a vast knowledge of World War II, but I come from the opposite side, where my father never fought in World War II, but his father did, for the Germans, because I'm German. And his father, basically his father was MIA, and then it found to be KIA in a Russian gulag. But when my grandfather, my father's father, was back on leave, and I think this is maybe like 1944, I think, and I'm not sure what his rank was, how high up he was. And I mean, he was a Nazi, they were all Nazis, but he wasn't like in the higher echelon. He was a soldier. And my father remembers his father coming home on leave one time, and I suppose kind of having this major realization of what was happening to the Jews, and said to my father, or actually said to my grandmother, his wife, because my father was too young, but said to his wife, because he came home and then went back out on leave and never came back. And he said to her, when I come back from this war, I will never lift another finger for this German army or government. And went off to fight and never came home. And my father, for about a year, every single day until they had to escape East Germany, every single day went to the train station to wait for his father to come home, and he never came home. And I mean, I'm just giving, that was the side of World War II that I grew up with. And of course, when my father came to the States and he saw the Nuremberg trials for the first time, and because he was only 10 when World War II was going on, and he, kind of made it like his mission in life to teach all of his kids about World War II, and the horrors of Nazism, and what it means to be free. And so the cultural impact for me is that this was a very moral war, as compared to what we hear about Vietnam, and what we've heard about wars since. I mean, you had Americans that were lying about their age just so that they could get in to fight in the war. And I think that but it's such an interesting, I guess, aspect in terms of how this show portrayed the Germans, because I didn't get the feeling that they portrayed Hitler in the horrible way that he was. And you don't find out until toward the end of the series what the Americans learn about how bad Hitler was, right? And that to me was like epic. But what was really interesting to me was how they portrayed just the ordinary German soldiers. Some of it was more like the higher ups that were like the evil ones and stuff. But there was that one episode where they were passing a captured, the captured soldiers that Lieutenant Spears had captured. And one of them, it was saying something. One of our American men was saying something, and then the German just came out and spoke perfect English, because he grew up basically in Iowa, and then went to
Mhm.
Germany was German, went to Germany to fight. And, you know, kind of one of what the American soldiers said was, God, if it wasn't for this war, we could have been friends.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a Pollyanna view of it, because, you know, there was a lot of stuff said about how most of the Germans didn't know what was going on with the concentration camps and the Holocaust, and that's simply not true. But I think the interesting aspect that they showed, at least for these soldiers, is that, well, we have to fight. We've been drafted just like everybody else. And I think that is also, we could talk about that from a philosophical perspective of, they didn't have the right philosophy to be able to stand up and say, no, we're not going to fight this war. This is an unjust and an immoral war. They had the exact opposite philosophy. So, I mean, to me, it's very culturally relevant war, especially as we're thinking about current wars that are going on, right, between Russia and Ukraine, and Palestine and Israel. But I do definitely think that the way that the German soldiers were portrayed was, I don't know, I felt like it was somewhat genuine and not disingenuous. I don't know if you guys had the same view on that, but I'll let somebody else talk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to gauge the genuineness. I don't know enough about the German experience. I mean, I read a long time All Quiet on the Western Front, but that's World War One. So it doesn't come across to me as implausible that a vast majority of people who are, many of them rural kids, are actually not that familiar understanding of what their people are doing. And so they're just going there and doing a job, just like what they say in the show. Some of the guys that were interviewed, especially I think in the episodes like The Last Patrol or Why We Fight, like the later episodes when they start interviewing or they have the interviews of those real people, you know, they say like, I probably could have been friends with that guy. We might have liked fishing or something like that. And I do think there's a plausibility of like how much information any German soldier might have individually had. So, you know, how evil in a sense was he? And I don't know if that's, you know, in terms of the genuineness of the show or not. But it's an important question in terms of historical context that this show is portraying. I mean, I thought it, to me, it made sense because they have part 9, which has Why We Fight. And so we see the fundamental, you know, one of the fundamental causes and things, which was the extermination of the Jews. But anybody else have any thoughts on the historical context and how it was portrayed?
Well, for me, what it helped me do is it gave me this historical timeline of the connection. So like, I've heard of D-Day in Normandy. I've heard Battle of the Bulge, or I don't even know if I had really knew the story of Bastogne. So for me now, it gives me a foundation for integrating anything I learn about it in the future. And then of course we're going to watch Pacific. So that's going to just add in even more. So to me, a foundation that no history class could give me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my foundation with it was a basic knowledge of the chronological events of World War II. I'd also read Shearer's book on Hitler, just for the rise and fall of the Third Reich. And I'd read Alice Miller's work. Alice Miller is a German psychologist who actually wrote profiles on Hitler and Ceausescu and various dictators. And she talked about the type of society that the German society was actually primed for this kind of violence. You know, when people ask the question, how could such, you know, insanity have manifested itself in a civil society, in a modern world? You know, this particular psychologist, I think, said it wasn't that. The Nazis largely rejected rationality. We know that they were mystics. They were, you know, proto-environmentalists. They were very much into German mysticism and mythology. And the society was organized and educated in a very Prussian way, in a very conformist way. So whether or not individuals knew the crimes that were being committed by the people in the upper stretches of the Nazi regime mattered less, that their psychologies wouldn't allow them to break out of the boxes that they were in. This is one of the things I found most disturbing about the show. We could talk about this a little bit later, was the surrender of the German colonel. What he says, and when he's being translated to the Americans, and there's a sense of camaraderie between both sides, as if, well, they're a band of brothers as well. They're in the same boat as us. I actually hated that a great deal, even though that was supposed to make me feel, that all the soldiers are probably what Jax was talking about. The soldiers are in the same boat. They're not aware. They're fighting for their company, very much the way a Virginia militiamen might have felt fighting for Virginia against the Union Army, as opposed to fighting for slavery, which was the overall battle that was being missed, right? In the person's focus of, this is my land and I have to defend it. My own personal connection with it beyond school books and my own reading is a strange one, because my stepfather was a World War II veteran. He was in the Pacific, and he was in some of the biggest battles of the Pacific. He was in Guadalcanal and he was in Midway, and as an 18-year-old boy, which explains some of the psychological issues he had later on down the line, and his violence and alcoholism. But my real father, whom I only discovered 2 years ago, was born in Leipzig, and he was drafted into Hitler's army at 15 years of age. His father was able to put him through, get him into a training program that avoided any combat, so that by the time Germany surrendered, he had never experienced combat and was able to flee East Germany, I think before the Russians got there, and find his way into Canada. So my own personal experience is, two World War II veterans from the two main theaters of the war were actually a part of my life. So in some respects, it's a personal visitation for me to see those battles reenacted.
Well, and I think that's one of the powers of the show, is that it was a world war. And so most people were probably affected and have some kind of story. I have a story where my grandmother was a French Jew, was fleeing. She was in Morocco, and she was saved from being killed by a Muslim, actually, in Morocco, who had followed her home, by
Wow.
American military police, who took her home and married her. And that was my grandfather. So, like that, we have those kinds of stories in a lot of our history. And that's, I think, why the World War II movie in particular, because it was such a pivotal world event, even more so than World War I think it affected everybody, and it changed the course of, or, it shaped history in a way that, I don't know, I guess every war does in some way, but it was such an impactful, powerful war. And I thought, a lot of literature and shows and movies in the past were, there's some amazing movies in this genre. But one thing that I think this movie did, or the show, and I call it a movie, one interesting thing I'll just point out is that this is one of the early TV shows that used movie budgets. So they were able, like, that's one thing that's really shaping, we can talk about this later, but it's an important point, because so much of this is like the realism that they were able to capture really draws you into the storytelling. And it really makes you, for me anyway, it made me really feel for what these guys were going through when, they're getting shot at, and as they're dropping in and they're all getting shot at. Like, I was terrified at that. One of the,
can I talk? Remind me, before you finish this, but I want to talk about what it means when you're talking about feature film approach to a television show.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To remind me that when you're done making your point, because it's an important point that I want to jump
Yeah,
on.
no, that's good. I'll just say that, so the historical context for me is making it real. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that this made it real. It's, if you read in a book and you read the facts on Wikipedia, or even a well-done book, I think it's very challenging to really put you in that place and really feel it. And I'll tell you one of the most impactful moments when I first saw the show. There's a lot of these moments, But one was just after the, you knew that they had been training for what, like a year and a half. All these guys were trained. And I just remember when they were flying into D-Day and
Yes.
seeing that
Yes.
plane go down, I was so frustrated in life. Like it's horrible to die in war, but the idea of doing like 2 years of training and all that preparation, not even getting into anything, like there was just something so unjust about that, even though obviously all death of the good guys is unjust, but there's something just extra metaphysically, and it was so terrible to see that. And I really like emotionally felt it intensely when those guys like the flame comes in and just kills all those guys, like years of training, and
Gone in an
that's true of
instant.
all of them. Yeah, and it's true of anybody who dies in that war, of course. But there's just something about that they never even made it down. Like it was just terrifying. Okay, so yeah, real quick before we move on to more stuff, Mark, tell us a little bit about the
Yeah,
difference between a TV show budget and a
yeah. So
movie.
a normal TV show that say now, of course, we have so many different formats. The old format was you have basically an hour-long TV show. It's probably about 45 or 50 minutes, and the script is somewhere in that range, a 50 to 60 page script, 1 minute per page per se. Now, most of the time when you're working on a TV show, you do 6 to 7 pages a day. That's you get an entire TV show done in 8 days. So when you're putting a feature film schedule on a episode that's as long as any other network television episode, you are adding 2 weeks to that schedule. So I think they took 21 days or more to shoot each episode, which enabled them to take 2 pages a day, 1 page a day to film at a feature pace,
Mm,
which is so they're not rushing. Oftentimes in television, especially old time television, not so much now, if it's in the frame and nobody fucked up, they're going to keep it.
yeah.
But when you got feature film money in a TV show, you could take it and take it and go and take it and take it and take it until you get it right. Additionally, these guys trained beforehand. They trained with a guy named Dale Dye. That was the go-to guy that everyone who did a military movie would do boot camp with this guy, and they became a real unit. They lived with each other for, I don't know, a month or definitely a few weeks before they had to get out there and actually, act. So, there's a real camaraderie, real dynamics that develop between people, love-hate relationships that develop that find their way into the screen when you have that kind of time and that kind of money.
Yeah, you
I
could
also
tell.
want
Oh,
to
go ahead, Jax.
No, I just wanted to put in context for our viewers of how much money was spent on Band of Brothers, because so as a frame of reference, the Game of Thrones budget worked out to about $10 million per episode, which is massive.
Huge.
That's a massive amount for a TV show. But Game of Thrones was what, between like 2016 and 2022 or something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
The Band of Brothers budget was 125 million for the whole series, which worked out to about 12.5 million per episode.
Wow.
And this is back in
Earlier.
2000 when they're shooting it, 2009, 2010, 2011, which is massive. And Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they say that like the biggest part of a movie or show budget is paying the actors, right? The bigger the actors, the more you've got to the higher named actors. At the time that Band of Brothers was shot, these were all kind of no-name actors. We didn't have any famous people. So the money they were putting into it wasn't really just for the actors. They were putting the money into the effects and the story, and like incredible
And
cinematography.
the deal might have been like the kind of deal you get when you work with Woody Allen. When you work with Woody Allen, it's favored nations. Everybody gets scale. It doesn't matter how big you are, you get scale.
Mm.
And they might have all been in that boat back then. And that makes me, when you talk about $12.5 million per episode, I remember when we did Mulholland Drive, and it was originally a pilot, a very linear story. it was reviewed by ABC as the best new TV show you'll never see, because it was $7 million for the pilot, and they just couldn't see their way to producing a whole TV series at that expense.
So were there moments in the show, and I guess another way of asking this is like a favorite episode, but I'm also curious about favorite, moments or impactful moments. Doesn't have to be like one that made you smile necessarily, but just moments, whether it's historical context, but because that's really what we're getting, I think, in so much of this is feeling what these characters are going through. Anything that really stood out for you? Like I already talked about one, which was the plane going down early on. But anything that really hits you in the gut as a powerful, moment or a favorite episode, whichever one you prefer.
Powerful moment would be episode 3, I believe. Was it Blythe or something, that blonde-headed kid that at first didn't join
Carrington,
the
yeah,
group?
Blythe, yeah.
And he is telling, one of the commanders comes up to him and when he's down in the ditch and at night, and he's like, I was scared, and the guy's like, look, we're all scared. And he said something like, like you haven't accepted the fact that you're dead yet. And
That's
once you do
Spears.
that, once you do that, then you will begin to function like a soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really powerful moment. And then you, of course, see him begin to function like a soldier as the episode goes on.
Now, as a writer, do you see how do you think they set that whole thing up? Right? Because that was a powerful moment because of all the things that were going on in that episode prior to it, right? Because it's a great line.
What are you referring to?
Well,
What
I'm
do you have in
saying
mind?
all the things you've been setting up about who Blythe is he basically he's a character who is drawn as, afraid. And the whole episode is how do you deal with fear? So they even have the clips from the documentary, which is a real documentary you can watch, where they're talking about some guys dealt with fear well, some guys didn't. I think I dealt with it well, but I didn't deal with it well after the war, right? Like, and there's all these different, and then you focus in on Blythe and you see that he's absolutely terrified, and the whole journey is him coming, getting to that. And you have Spears as one type of leader who is telling him, this is what you have to do. I think later there's a moment when the thing that really triggers him is seeing Winters standing above him outside of the foxhole, shooting his weapon at the Germans, while Blythe can barely hold his weapon. And, he looks up at him, and Blythe looks up at Winters, and finally, but I'm just curious about your thoughts as how that was, because it was an important moment that you're pointing out. And it was all, I think, set up by great writing, where they had really developed that character so that moment would be, all these different leaders are trying to get him to come out of his shell. Like he had that moment of blindness. So they're all aware that something's going on with Blythe. And that whole episode is about how can we get Blythe to operate as a soldier, to do his job, which is what a leader.
That starts in character development, which you see him in, episode 2. So they were planning that out. And if you plan a good character arc, then that's kind of the journey that they went on. So yeah, that was very good writing.
I think it's also when you plan that character and you're like, okay, we're going to have this character who represents, the terrified soldier and who freezes. What's the thing that we can say to that soldier to get him out of it? And like the obvious tropey things are like, there's a good reason for it. We're fighting the moral war, and you just have to think of your kids and your family, and you'll be back home, and you can't have any negative thoughts in your head. And the writers turned it on the other side. They turned it on the end. Like, no, you're dead. That's really good writing. Just that's why that line was so amazing, because they set it up so well that, because up until that point, the soldiers are kind of being like, when they recognize that a soldier doesn't have that kind of fear, they're being positive toward them, and they're like, come on, pull out, you can make it. And the character who says that to Blythe is understands something fundamental about his character, like, oh, this guy needs to accept that he's dead, and then he can go on. So I think that's a really good storytelling.
And
Yeah.
I love that they plant that seed, but that's not the moment he changes. It's like
Mhm.
what you
Right.
said, Kirk. It's the visual of looking up to the real leader and following his lead. And that's it. Nothing's said at that moment when he actually has changed.
Well, there's other moments like I think it's Martin is his name, and one of the sergeants or something. He's in the foxhole with Blythe, and he's like saying, it's just a game, Blythe. We're just pushing the ball one. So throughout the episode, I think there's all different types of ways of understanding Blythe, his character, and trying to get him into that. Even when he's in the, when he's in when he's blind, when he's had that hysterical blindness, they're trying to figure, Eugene is the doc is trying to work with him to make him better. Winter sees him and is like, well, if you think you can come back, then come on back. Although he was going to let him go and say, just go because you can't fight. So it's all, to me, it was great writing because they really hit fear from various different angles. They even have that one as a theme, like fear in war as the theme of this episode. And they hit it from all different angles to help it. And to me, what that does is it brings out more of the realism of it, and it makes you understand it versus, one thing you could easily just have someone like free, like they did with Upham and, the other movie, the other Tom Hanks movie with Saving Private Ryan, where like Upham freezes. Like that's one way to show fear. And that's a movie you
Oh
have
my
a shorter
God,
period of time.
that scene kills me.
Yeah, it kills me every time. Yeah.
Kills me.
Yeah. But, I just thought this one, because they had more time to play out, you could see all the different facets of how fear looks in real life. And there's a great book I recommend people reading, fiction book called The Red Badge of Courage, which kind of addresses
I
the
love
same.
that book. I
Yeah,
read that
great
in
book.
ninth grade.
Yeah, it's a great like high school, but it, good young age praise it. But okay, so any other pivotal moments? I want to make sure we have some.
First of
Yeah,
all,
so- go ahead.
You go ahead.
So my favorite episode, and also one of my more favorite arcs, was with Ron Livingston's character, who plays second to
Nixon?
Winters. Nixon, yeah.
Yeah.
And my favorite episode that he is in is episode 9, the Why We Fight.
Mhm.
Because Nixon is kind of Nixon and Winters are really good together, but they are kind of polar opposites in terms of their sense of life, I think. And they both Winters is very like straight and narrow. He's a very moral character. He doesn't drink. But both men, really care about their team members, or care about their company. But so Nixon, on the other hand, is an alcoholic, seems somewhat purposeless. And in terms of, he just wants the war to be over so that he can go back home, and he's trying to find, the best alcohol that he can. And what I love that this show does is that almost every episode focuses on a particular soldier's journey. They do a really good job of that. And up until, so they set up Nixon really well for episode 9, where, because he asked a question. He asked it, maybe he asked it at the beginning of episode 9. He might have asked it in episode 8, where he's talking to Winters, and he's been demoted. He's not really doing, he's not really interested in advancing very much in the military. And he's like, why are we even here? Like, what's the point? Why are we what are we even helping? Like, he just didn't understand the morality of that war, because they were just looking at it like, well, they sent us to war, we got to kill the Nazis. Apparently they're doing bad stuff. And there's this great moment where Livingston goes into a German house near where Dachau was, one of the concentration camps, and he goes into a German house in search of alcohol, and runs across a woman. The house happens to belong to a high level colonel in the army, and doesn't find him, but the wife is there, and the wife just looks at him very much like, you're beneath me, look at the kind of man that you are, whatever. and he kind of, like you say, you can tell that he sort of almost agrees with her, like, yeah, I am a piece of shit. And then they find the concentration camp, and this was I'm pretty sure it was Dachau. But it was part of the huge camp that was that had been turned into a labor camp. And then when the Germans knew that they were going to be losing the war, they just start burning all the Jews, and they're just horrible conditions. And this marked sort of the realization on the Americans' part, the first time that the Americans were like, oh my God, this is what they're doing. And you just see this sort of transformation in Ron Livingston's just anger and indignance. And also, I almost feel like it's like shame for not understanding the morality of it, or not really seeing the significance of it. And I can't remember if it was his character or not that does, so I won't even talk about that particular episode, that particular scene. But the scene that was amazing to me was this switch between Livingston's character, between Nixon and the German woman that was the wife of the colonel, because they made all the Germans, because they were like, oh, the Germans are saying they don't, they weren't aware of this. And he was like, well, they'll be aware of it soon enough, because they're going to have to clean up everything. They're burying the bodies, and they're going to see exactly what happened at this camp. And the woman is, and it was really interesting because she's wearing I don't know if you guys notice this or not, and I read into things too much sometimes, but she's wearing a red coat. And it's kind of among the bodies that are sort of like blue filter. It's not black and white, but it did remind me of that scene in Schindler's List where with the little girl with the red coat who that Liam Neeson, finally she became real to him. She was a real person to him. And it kind of reminded me of that, because there was that same scene where the girl was picking over the bodies. But he sees the woman, like, just, she doesn't even want to touch the body. She's disgusted by it, like, I'm above this. And then they lock eyes, and he just, no words are exchanged. And you can tell just that the way that he looks at her is like, you deserve to be picking up those bodies, and you need to do it respectfully. And she completely changes her attitude, and begins to help, and sort of, understands that the shame is on her. And I just thought that was, I was crying. I was bawling my eyes out for that episode.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Mark, you had one?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say the fight as if you're dead is a samurai maxim. So I don't know if that was the writer's creativity putting that in there, knowing that, or whether one of the characters actually said that. Because of course we have the benefit of Stephen Ambrose's text, which comes from the people themselves. So who knows how many of these words are taken from the men themselves. It's hard for me to pin down like a favorite episode, because I cried through a lot of it. I had very intense emotional Lipton's story very much moved me, in part because the NCO, the non-commissioned officer, the sergeant, is really the glue that keeps the army together. He's really the soul, heart and soul of the army. And when he gets the battlefield commission, and he seems sort of shamefaced about it, and he's told, there's this guy who really was out there and kept everybody together, and when everything was supposed to fall apart, he was the one who was the glue. You don't know who I'm talking about, do you? And he says, no, you were that guy. That made me, I almost died at that, because it was so amazing. The whole Bastogne episode was I was freezing through it. I was uncomfortable through it. I felt like this is my esteem for these men to have gone through the torture that particular battle grew enormously, because I don't know that I would have the physical or mental or emotional stamina to withstand what they did. Because for everybody who hasn't seen it, this is a spoiler, they go into this winter campaign without winter clothes, without ammunition, and without food. So they go in there with everything against them. And yet these men, the 101st Airborne, and they have such amazing pride. It's their pride, their esprit de corps, that carries them through it all. Also, two things I wanted to say that I think are uniquely American virtues that found themselves in a couple of the scenes, and that is defiance. Americans don't follow orders if they think the orders are bad. This is a uniquely American thing. And when they find out that Captain Sobel is going to be leading them into the first battle, when he can't even find his ass with a map and a compass, they refuse to have him lead them, and they actually risk their careers
and their lives.
and their lives to get somebody else to lead them. And I think they wanted Winters to lead them, of course, because he's the competent guy. I don't remember exactly who, but and
Just
of
not
course,
Sobel.
just not Sobel, who turns out to be such a petty, grasping, greedy little man. He's the type of person he even tries to ruin. Does he try to ruin Winters at one point?
Yes,
Winters,
he
yeah,
does.
he tries to ruin Winters at one point, and Winters stands up to him. And there's a great moment where that comes back around, when now Winters has surpassed him. He's now a major, and he salutes Sobel as he's walking past him, because he's now like a supply officer, and that he demands the salute back, which I thought was really great. And also
you salute the role, not the man, I think he said.
salute the
Uniform.
rank,
Uniform, the rank, yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Also,
Oh, yeah.
Also the refusal to go on that second assault when they captured the
Yeah,
prisoner.
and that Winters lied about it, right? That
Yeah.
He lied about it to
Ah.
protect his men. Those acts of defiance I wish people understood this. I don't know that young people really do. That's a uniquely American thing, to value human life to the degree that you don't let elites. There is no elite here, even in an army that more or less stratifies status. There's still going to be somebody's sense of right and wrong that may overturn that status at any time. And seeing it there was very surprising to me. I forgot about it in the book, so it was quite amazing to see that American defiance.
Well, I think also the Why We Fight episode 9 is one. It's a really powerful episode, particularly they actually is the only episode that does not have any of the interviews. I don't know if you noticed that. It just starts with the violin and it ends with the violin. And it is like a little movie, and it's more fictionalized in a sense, because it doesn't have the nonfiction aspects at the beginning. But I think that it kind of adds to the power of getting you into that feeling. And one of the things I noticed, and I just don't know if enough people make this connection. I definitely don't think enough people make this connection in this world today that I wish they would, is that that's what you have to do in defeating an enemy, is put their face in it. Like,
yes.
Because that's what that episode really is all about. It's really like, you see the Germans who, whether they all knew all the details or not, that's not really, to me, the most important thing. It's that they were able to evade all this stuff that was going on right around the corner from them. Like,
Yep.
you could say you don't know something, maybe they didn't, but you had to like willfully not know. You had to be like, well, I'm getting along and everything's fine, and I'm gonna make
That
my
episode
bread.
or that
And
scene with the baker, right?
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly. And like, maybe he didn't know. It's very plausible he just went to his bakery, went upstairs and didn't. But the problem is that he didn't want to know. He didn't want to think about what was going on in the world that he was participating in and feeding soldiers and people who were doing this stuff.
There's a
And
really good, I want to recommend a book at the end of this. So go ahead with what you're saying, Kirk.
okay, yeah, what's the book?
Well, the book is called Hitler's Willing Executioners. And it turns on its end the overall concept of, well, we didn't know what was going on. The regular Germans just didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really bold and brave for them to have that scene as in the baker, because they're basically going into town where the camp is, maybe a mile or 2 miles out. Right. And sure, it's in the middle of nowhere. Maybe people aren't going to the forest, but he says something when he like puts when the soldier crashes into the baker and puts him over, and he says, okay, so you're not a Nazi. Are you a human being? You could smell the burning, you could smell what they were doing. Because burning flesh is a very, very specific smell. And in this book, Hitler's Willing Executioners, it kind of knocks down all of the theories of, well, we didn't know what was going on. No, they did know. They chose to evade, and
So
they
does
chose to not want to learn more.
so does Alice Miller's book when she talks about the pedagogy of the German people. Kirk, I think this is particularly relevant to today, to the Gazan war, where people are screaming for a ceasefire. And when we come back as objectivists, many of us do this. I don't know that all of us do. We say, no, the Palestinians are suffering. This is what needs to happen. They have to suffer until they stop doing what they're doing, believing the things that they're believing. They have to have their faces rubbed in it. And we live in a culture now that evades that discomfort. It evades the awareness, the full awareness of the evil that they're doing. Sherman understood that in the Civil War. He understood that the only reason the war was continuing the way it was continuing is because the rich planters in the South didn't experience the war. It wasn't at their doorstep. So what did he do? He took it to their doorstep. He burned their crops. He burned their plantations. He said, war is hell. I'm marching through Georgia, and you're going to know it. You're going to know war now. And it ended. It ended. War ends when people understand that what they are trying to do will bring hell on earth to their doorstep.
Yes, and I think that episode, the episode here doesn't go into all the details of it, but I thought they did a very subtle, personal job of making that. And Jax, the moment you talked about earlier with the German woman, I think is, that almost represents the whole, people in a sense of what they needed to realize, because how could you be in bed with a man and not know how evil he was? And
Right.
obviously she did, or at least had some inkling of what, because he could have been the head of that camp, right? Like that he probably was. He probably was the head of that camp. And she's like, I'm better than you because you're a drinker. And, one little touch that I thought was really interesting. And this is, maybe this will actually move us into the next segment that I wanted to talk about, which was characters and acting, and how do you project this? And I'll just bring this up and we can talk a little bit about this. But so Nixon in that episode is just got a letter that his wife is leaving him and taking the dog. And so, and she's like, she doesn't even like that dog. It's not even her dog. And he's like so upset about this. And it's really, his life is a mess. And he goes into this German house where life was probably really nice. The family house looked very calm. You had a cute little dog kind of just barking at one step. And he looks at the dog and just like, and then walks away. So it's like, to me, it was a very interesting, shift of, here's these people, they have this great house and there's no chaos. It doesn't feel like there's chaos in the household. And yet they're doing this systematic slaughter of, good people. And whereas Nix, who's, military intelligence, he's doing this thing so, he may have been somewhat equal in his kind of role to the guy that house. He's kind of in very polar opposite of this, but he has good and moral on his side. Okay, but let's talk about the acting. And Mark, I wanted to start with you because, well, one, you had a story I wanted you to tell everyone about. You were a part, you've done a portrayal of a real life person. These are people, so like, and this blew my mind just thinking about this, is like these characters in this show, they're literally, right before they're on screen, there's a clip of the hero they are playing. And there has to be and they must have met those. I don't know if they met them, like, but there must be an intimidation to that, to like portray, one of the great American heroes of these, you know what I mean? And how do you take on that role? How do you portray someone, especially if that person's still alive and, you're telling this war story that's such a part of our DNA as Americans? How do you take that on?
Yeah, so it is daunting, especially if they're alive, because they're going to see it and they're going to judge you. You hold a kind of a part of their reputation in the palm of your hand. Just a little piece of trivia: I actually auditioned for the part of Winters, but at the time I had a shattered leg. I did it with a cast. It was a very fun audition. I had a great time, and of course, casting director was like, "Oh, that was amazing. what's going on with your leg? When will it heal? And I lied. I said, a couple weeks. But it was shattered. It was literally shattered. I had metal in it, and so there was no way I could go to a callback or do the boot camp that they were going to do. So I missed out on that opportunity because of physical issues. Now, the character that I played was Dick Hickok who was one of the quote unquote killers in Cold Blood, a story popularized by Truman Capote, and I did it in the movie Capote. And what I was fortunate enough to have were tapes of Dick talking. So he actually took a very proactive stance in attempting to defend to save his life. He didn't actually commit any of the murders. I think today he would have been found not guilty for a number of reasons. But I got to listen to hours of him talking, and I read the book in Cold Blood 7 times.
Wow.
Now, partly because Truman Capote had a talent for capturing the voices of the people that he interviewed. Apparently, he had amazing recall. He could recall 99% of every conversation that he ever had. And he could also capture the voice of the people that he was talking to. So I got a sense of the character's voice, literally and figuratively through him. And there was some film, a little bit of film captured on the two men. So I watched as much of that as they could give us. And had I been playing somebody like Winters, I didn't see any. I know a lot of those actors, and I didn't see any characterizations in them. They were more or less themselves, and were probably cast because they were very much like the character, like the part, or as the producers imagined them to be. I didn't see any characterizations in Damien, who played Winters.
Yeah.
I didn't see him when I'd see Winters actually interviewed. Of course, it's a much older man now, but I didn't see any of the same characteristics in the two. One seemed very, very laconic and had a different energy, had a much more peaceful, calm energy than Damien did. Damien, he's got a certain something to him that maybe Winters had when he was a young man. But certainly if you can study the person, if you can see how they move and incorporate it into your world, if they have a different dialect, and you can incorporate that, certainly that takes lots and lots and lots of practice.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to ask a question about character arcs and the larger story and getting that historical accuracy. Because that, from a writing perspective and from an acting perspective, because that to me seems the hardest thing to get, is that here's what really happened. You have stories of what really happened. You have a specific thing that these types of things actually happen at this time. But then you have to somehow show that in your acting while maintaining historical accuracy to your character, or being honest.
You don't have to show anything. The words, the stuff takes care of itself. I mean, David Mamet wrote a book called True and False, where he sort of puts down every acting technique on the planet, even though he studied from Sanford Meisner at the Neighborhood Playhouse, and that's very much his approach. He was the only director who's ever given me a totally actable direction in all of the things I've ever done. And he nonetheless is like, acting technique. Come on, you say it, you say the words, and you do the things that the script is telling you to do, and shit happens. Real experiences happen. You as the actor don't have to worry about the arc so much. You have to be engaged in the moment. You as a person in life don't know your own character arc. You just know that your day-to-day living and what you've planned for the future. And like good scripts, they take your plans and they fuck them up. They put all kinds of obstacles in the way, and then you got to deal with it. And there's certainly a how you deal with it that is enmeshed in a character. If it's outside of the way you would in life, then you'd certainly have to know what that is. But you don't have to be demonstrative about anything or show anything. It takes care of itself.
But they
Does that
are.
make sense?
Would you be aware? Oh, go ahead, Jax.
I was just going to say, I do think that there is a natural character arc built into telling the story of soldiers in war, because it especially if you're starting out the story where they've not been in war before, and especially with Easy Company, you follow them through their boot camp and basic training, and then war creates an arc in and of itself, right? The war itself, and depending on what these personality types are like, these characters, that arc naturally goes a progression. What I thought was interesting about Damian Lewis's character is I don't think that he had a tremendous arc, and I think that's okay.
I agree.
He was the constant. He was already baked. He was, his cookie was already there.
He's the Rock. He's like the
right.
Rourke. He's the Rock. Yeah.
Yeah. He starts out and he stays consistent, which is really good, because you look at all it makes all the other arcs really interesting in comparison to his. But I don't know how you can have war and not have an arc. But I will say that it is, as a writer, it is a very specific challenge to write on real historical figures, episode after episode, building in arcs, building in climaxes, because life doesn't work in the same way that a story works, right? But you have to make it so, and you have to make it true at the same time, or at least resonate true.
And Kirk, the good news about this show, this is like one of the first shows where they started coming out with 10 episodes, where they started emulating the BBC model of television, right? And oftentimes when you're doing an episodic television in 23 episodes, the writers themselves don't know where the character is going. So you are often in the dark about where your arc is, even though, I've done shows where I'm like, well, fuck, I wish I knew that, 7 episodes ago, because if I knew that, then that changes a lot.
Yeah.
If you would know it, you should.
Yeah.
So if there's aspects to your arc that you would know, because it's they should have planted a seed that let you know what was going on, then it's definitely, you don't show it, but it's definitely it's part of your process. It should be part of your process.
I see. Yeah, that's like the Severus Snape thing.
But the part, yeah, but the part
story.
of it. Well, tell me that in a second. But the art of acting is knowing where you're going, but acting is if you don't. It's knowing where you're going and yet allowing it to happen spontaneously, as if you don't know where you're going, as if the moment is taking you there, right? In Hamlet, I know I'm going to die. I know it's a tragedy. I know in the end, Hamlet dies. But I still have to be fervently searching for the truth, trying to unmask the killer. So I let the arc go to my subconscious somewhere while I actively engage in the problem of the moment.
Well, so this is a question I have. So think about Buck Compton. He comes in episode 2. He's like, I don't know his exact rank, sergeant, or maybe he's a lieutenant. But anyway, he's in charge of a group of men, right? And he's very happy-go-lucky. He seems very enjoyable, pleasant. He's always joking. Seems like in a good sense of mood. His arc seems to be one of the more harsh ones.
Yes.
Because he collapses at the end, in a sense.
Yes.
He's just like huddled. He's like this, after Joe Toy and the other gentleman, Garnier, get their legs blown off. And he just, there's that scene from the opening sequence where he drops his helmet, like that pivotal moment. He's done. He's emotionally, spiritually crushed. That's in episode 7, The Breaking Point. And
that was okay. That was one of my favorite episodes, by the way, because that was
powerful,
crazy.
Yeah, it was a crazy episode. It's one of my favorite. I mean, they're all so good. It's hard to say, but yeah, that one's amazing in terms of emotional impact.
Luckily, these actors got all 10 episodes. They get all 10 episodes because they're probably all written by that time, and they'll do some polishes on them on the way, but you'll basically know what your character goes through the whole.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, is so as I guess as an actor, but also maybe this applies to writer in the same way, is he's aware of that. So that is going to go into his acting on some level. Like he might play up a little bit more so he could have more of a collapse or something like that. I don't know, but he has some, at least it informs his process, as you said earlier.
Yeah, so it inform his process. Maybe we're saying the same thing in just different language. It would definitely, he knows that he's going to have a collapse. And if that makes him as an actor choose to be, very much the opposite in personality, I think it's in the script. It's all
Okay.
probably there in the script.
Yeah.
Just like
I just didn't know if he would play that earlier. So like if he would, not the knowledge of it, but just like where he's going would affect how he's starting. That's my question. So like the Severus Snape story I was going to tell you is I don't know if you know about, if you've seen Harry Potter, if you like anybody Potter people, but
yeah.
Okay, so I won't spoil it then, but basically who's the actor who plays Severus Snape? Passed away, Alan Rickman, right? He was told by J.K. Rowling the secret of his character that doesn't appear until the very final seventh book, that is in the seventh part two of book.
That's
two.
important.
And it was so important that other directors did not know it throughout the time. And so they'd be like, why are you playing it this way? And he's like, you just have to trust me on this one. And it was just like a whole thing. So like what I'm saying is his character, there was something in there that his character knew, or the actor knew, that informed the character. That wasn't just an immediate thing, but I guess that was a backstory. So I should take that back. That was a secret backstory.
Well, that is relevant, but
Yeah,
but there's oftentimes in those 23 episode shows where they would give a character arc and or a backstory, and you look at it and you just say, I would have done the whole season differently if I had known this in advance. But the problem is the writers don't know it in advance. And now they can, now that they're doing 6, 8, 10 episodes, now they can plan out 5 seasons of something, and they can do the whole thing.
I think that's why TV's so much better now, is because they have the time to do that.
Exactly.
I agree. And
yeah, how many times in TV shows before we had serial TV where it was 22, 24 episodes, even when we did have serial TV, where it was like that season took a completely dramatic shift, and it, you could tell that the writing room changed, that the character arcs were different, and that's the kind of thing that just pulls you out of or pops you out of the narrative. But with the kind of TV that you're doing now, where you see the scripts and what the end is going to be, at least from season to season, that changes the ball game, I think, of TV.
I agree. Like having that full structure. And
there was a funny story, a super quick story with Game of
Yeah.
Thrones when the writers David Benioff and I can't remember the other TV writer's name, but they're screenwriting partners, where they sat down with George R.R. Martin to pitch him on doing Game of Thrones, and Martin hadn't finished the series yet, and so the reveal of who Jon Snow was hadn't happened yet, and George R.R. Martin asked him. Many people had approached him before, and he rejected all of them for to make the series. And he asked the writers one question. He said, "Okay, I'll let you do it if you tell me who you think Jon Snow is."
No, who Jon Snow's mother is.
Sorry, who's Jon Snow's? Well, what Jon Snow's background is, who his mother is, and they guessed it, and he was like, "Yep, you got it." So I just thought that was, that's good storytelling. That's good writer gatekeeping, I guess.
That's good storytelling. Okay, so I did want to talk about some themes and cultural impact of this as perhaps a final segment here. So we've already talked about a lot of impact in terms of just the television industry, because this is one of the first big budget, and I think it really set the precedence for shows like Game of Thrones and others, where it's like, oh, this is the model. Like, we need to find good writers. We need to give them the money they need to do the kind of show that they need to do. And I think, I don't think you could do a True Detective in a 1980s style of, a show. I don't think that type of show can exist back then. I think you have to have a post Band of Brothers. I don't know if this is the first one for sure, but I know it's one of the early ones that
Sopranos was a big
one.
Oh, The Sopranos was the first one.
I would agree with Jennifer. Sopranos.
It's around the same time, though, right? And at the same time, Sopranos.
I'd have to look that up.
I'll have to look it up. It's definitely early early.
I think the Sopranos came after The Wire, and I always see when I think of HBO, like how they made their mark on big budget TV. I always think of The Wire, but maybe I'm wrong in my
Sopranos is
history.
1999. Just so you know.
Yeah,
I feel
like Sopranos changed television, and
yeah, that makes sense.
And then the Wire. I mean, those shows really upped the ante.
Now I want to know who the executive was at HBO, because it was Sopranos 99, Band of Brothers 2001, The Wire 2002. So this is probably like some executive change that happened where they're like there's some visionary,
yeah.
brought all this together. He was a good one.
I should know this.
Yeah, that's but yeah, so like, but also I think the cultural impact of just the show itself, not just on television, but also on culture. I've already said on other shows, I think, about my love of reaction videos. And Band of Brothers is one of the most reacted to reaction videos. And these shows get hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of views. So you have, dozens, if not hundreds of YouTubers doing reaction videos to Band of Brothers, getting hundreds of thousands or millions of views. That's on top of the millions of views it already has. It's, so this thing is resonating with people decades after it's been created, which is pretty rare. So this has some kind of influence that I think is worth thinking about. And I was curious about your thoughts about the kind of resonance and cultural impact that you think it might have.
Well, I mean, I didn't know this, that they do these reaction videos with this show, particularly so many years after the fact. I did get the sense that this was one in a handful of shows that changed the way television was made. I even think it influenced the way Lost was done, because Lost was a different network at ABC, right? So a network that was typically much more conventional in its approach to television. But we would spend 3 weeks on the finale episode. 3 weeks with 2 crews going simultaneously, and that I think comes from the feature film orientation of television. Another cultural change was, look, at one time television was considered a demotion for an actor. A feature film actor wanted to be a movie star. Theater actor wanted to be a Broadway star. If you were on TV, you were considered a hack. In fact, one of my very good friends, who has since done a show for like eight or 9 years, refused to do television. And I'm like, dude, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy, because you can make bank and you can be independent. Don't be stupid. Do a TV show. He eventually did a TV show. But he resisted it for a long time. I think because his dad was a major star. And I don't know that his dad did any TV. He just did feature films. So, but because of The Sopranos and because of The Wire and because of Band of Brothers, feature film directors were crossing over, feature film actors were crossing over. That's no mistake that the television sets got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. They're capturing more detail. You don't want to see a bad television actor on an 80-inch screen. You want to see a good feature film actor who's subtle and clear up there, and it's transformed our medium and the way we watch TV. We don't even have to go to movies anymore. We have these big screen TVs. We have feature film actors and directors giving us television. So yeah, and I think and I hope its cultural impact is even deeper, because I feel like we live in an age of narcissism, and the characters that these men represented, and what I mean by characters, the virtues that they embodied, are so important for every human being to emulate. That every young child should see this and look to emulate many of the virtues that those men had, especially Winters, he's like the Howard Rourke of the show.
I think that one of the cultural impacts, at least for me, was, and I had not had negative impressions about soldiers before I saw Band of Brothers the first time. I didn't start out there. But what I was, with the exception of one other piece of work that I'll talk about in a second, all of the the movies and the shows that I had seen, not really, there weren't like a lot of shows, but the movies that I had seen about soldiers and war up until that time didn't really show the morality of these soldiers and the just like the nakedness of being in war, and it didn't humanize the soldiers. I mean, there was Saving Private Ryan for sure, but it just wasn't humanized to me in a way. What I had seen before then was, Tom Cruise in Born on the 4th of July and Vietnam movies where
Platoon.
our Platoon, Apocalypse Now, where, horrible things were, the horrible things were happening, and the soldiers weren't seen or treated as actual humans with lives, with values, with goals. And we see it today where, in war, in war strategy, unfortunately today, we just send our soldiers out, and, we're still, we make this distinction between the soldiers and innocent civilians, and the soldiers are the expendable ones. And yes, up to a certain point, they've signed up to sacrifice their lives, to give up their lives for the sake of their country and their mission. But this was the first show to me that came along and really humanized their experience with great respect, with great honor to what these soldiers value, to their lives and their loves and the simple things, getting a piece of chocolate, finally getting out of the cold and getting a blanket, or when the fog lifts in Bastogne and they're able to drop in supplies to them. It was so humanizing. And the exception, I was going to say, with the exception of MASH, because I think MASH, the TV show, if anybody hasn't seen MASH, I think it was probably one of the most brilliant war TV shows, especially when it came out in the 70s. And it humanized. It was a Korean War, but it was a sitcom. Somehow it managed to mix, greatly comedy and tragedy. But I think Band of Brothers had and hopefully still would have a positive impact on the culture of understanding what it means to be on the right side of a war, and still the toll that it takes, just the absolute, violence and destruction and murder, and but still being able to come out on the right side of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, it seems like I don't really know what kind of cultural impact it's having, but I can say that it seems like we were on this trajectory. We had great military movies like Top Gun in the 80s, and then it's been going kind of anti-military, anti-war ever since, as the culture is changing. And yet this is the one show where it seems like every man that I've spoken to has not only seen it, but seen it multiple times. And it's like, wait, what? And we've been doing TV talk for a couple of years, and I don't get that with any other show. In fact, even my brother was like, I've seen that 5 times. I was like, you have? Like, I didn't even know that about my own brother. So it's kind of gives me hope that this story is being told to a younger in a way that's resonating.
Well, so something I don't know how to I'm trying to make this as short as possible. So I think there's an important role that war literature as a broad genre plays for us, because the one reality we have to, understand, of course, is that even in the midst of a war, a very small portion of the population actually experiences real combat. Even people in the military, very few, like Nixon reveals at the end, like, I never shot. And Winters is like, really? And yeah, he did. He never shot one, although he does
But
get
then
shot in
Winters
the head at one point. But
Winters himself also, after the first campaign or so, didn't end up
after Bastogne,
shooting.
that's in the last episode points when he's being interviewed. The commanding officer's like, you went through Bastogne without firing a shot. Now that's a test of a leader. And that's right. That was a good, that was a really good moment. But the point is that part of the role that I think that war movies make, and I do have to make a distinction. I don't think Top Gun is a war movie. I think it's an action adventure, because a war movie is something very specific where it's really trying to, like, part of it, the role of a war movie is, or a war genre, is to educate you on the specific thing. It's to get you to empathize with what these individuals went through. And
I want to make clear, but we were talking about culture, and Top Gun was very much a part of culture back then.
oh, okay. Okay. I thought you
Yeah.
said something like it was a war movie, and I was like, it's not a war movie.
Military, pro-military.
Okay. Yeah. So if you're making the argument that there was like there's a pro-military thing, I think that's true. I don't know that Band of Brothers. I mean, I guess it is kind of pro-military, but it's more like that's not the focus in my view. Like it's not like America is good. They even have that scene that Mark hates, right? Which is the guy who sums up the entire theme of the show is a German general, and he's doing it in
Yeah, what
German.
do you think? Well, now, what do you think of that, Kirk? Because
I think
that
I
really
think that would have
bothered me.
that scene would have worked really good if after he made that speech, Winters shot him point blank in the head.
Now, I mean, look, there's
I
a
mean,
part of me,
the war was over though. But
there's a part
But
of me
still.
that there's a part of me that thinks it's good writing. It is. There's a part of me that it makes a dynamic, thematic point that we were talking about earlier, which is, which is sort of seeded throughout. I think I could have gone fishing with this guy. We had the soldiers on the ground have a lot more in common than they do differences. They're experiencing the same types of things in the same way. They're under the same kinds of pressures, and even when you're on opposite sides, it's that crucible of war that you're in that binds you together in a way that no other people can understand. So even though they're on the opposite side, those experiences bind them together. It makes a true point. I just didn't like it. It made a moral equivalence in a sense to me that it wasn't deserved.
I agree.
what? Yeah, I mean, I guess to me what it shows is the focus of the show is more focused on as an art on the Band of Brothers theme. And that's
Yes.
really what they're doing. And they were by selecting as the subject the American soldiers and this part. Because remember, this is still one teeny sliver of this massive Allied war. We're just seeing a sliver of it. And what's the point of that from an artistic standpoint? It's to expand an important point, which is the band that is forged between men in war. And that's, I think, what the major theme, it's called Band of Brothers for that reason. And I think what they're showing is that this is a more universal theme, that
Yes.
it does apply to the opposite soldiers, whether they're right or wrong. I don't, that's a separate issue to me. In the
Fair
Why
point.
We Fight episode, we get that they were wrong, that the other side was, bad. I mean, there's that kind of funny scene where oh man, he's super famous now. He plays Bane. What's the actor's
Tom Hardy.
Tom Hardy. Thank you, Tom Hardy. Great, he was great. And he's like reading an article,
Yeah.
and he's
What
like,
are you reading? An article.
yeah, I'm reading an article. Yeah, it's great writing, right? And it's like, okay. But he said, and he's like, what's it about? And he's, well, the Germans, they're bad. And then everyone else is like, oh, did you hear that? The Germans, they're bad. And it's just like, okay. But to me, the point is that that's not the point of this whole series. Now, that is the point of episode 9 in a sense, but you don't see the other soldiers very much, except as they're shooting at you and you're shooting at them, right? Like it's really so, this is what makes it such a powerful art, is they're so focused on, this 101st Airborne and all their experiences and boot camp and in Carrington. And, you see the enemy soldiers just kind of yelling at each other as they're shooting at you, and that's it. So my point is that I think what they're doing by scanning out for a minute with that German soldier in the last episode is you get the universality of this theme of Band of Brothers. And I do think it could apply to those Germans.
I agree with you.
And there are a lot of famous, so since we're talking about Tom Hardy, I know there's a lot of famous actors in here, right? And I would be curious who spotted who. Did anybody? So we kind of chatted about this, so we kind of spoiled it. But who did you all catch as a famous person that was not famous at the time of the making of this, but became super famous? There's like
I
at
didn't
least
catch
8.
I didn't catch everybody. Jennifer pointed one out to me.
Who did you
And
catch?
I caught James McAvoy,
Okay,
Tom Hardy,
so James McAvoy
Fassbender.
is replacements. He's one of the replacements who gets killed. Yeah.
Mhm.
Who was the last one?
What's the Fassbender's first name?
Michael Fassbender.
Michael Fassbender, so who played Magneto. So
Yeah.
we had Magneto and what's his
Xavier.
name? And
Professor
Xavier,
X.
right? The Professor X in the same episode. So many people, I think, like so many famous people came out of Band of Brothers now. But there were many more. Who was the one that Jennifer? Who was the one that you pointed out?
Who'd you find?
Jimmy Fallon, who was already famous, but he was just like passing out food or something. I was like,
Was
wait,
he
what?
famous?
Is that? Yeah, he was.
He was
Wasn't
on
already
SNL. I think he was on
SNL by
SNL.
then?
Okay, but not as famous as he became. I mean, he was an SNL cast member. I don't know if that makes him super famous. I mean, he's more famous than me, but you know, he's not as famous as he is today.
Yeah, so the first person I recognized was Andrew Scott. I was like, holy crap, that's Andrew Scott. I wonder what's going to happen to him. Dead.
Yeah. And
but the same with McAvoy. I'm like, oh, there's McAvoy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what's going to happen to him? Dead.
Dead.
Oh, that's not funny at all.
And then, but then my buddy Richard Spade is in it. He played Muck, and you know, you see him, he's featured throughout, and you know, then finally in episode 7, he's saying stuff. I'm like, oh shit, he's finally talking. My buddy Richard's talking. What happens to him then? Dead.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. What
And
episode does he die in?
What's that?
What episode does he die in? 7, you said?
Remember, I think it's in Breaking Point. It's in Bastogne. They're going, come to our foxhole, come to our foxhole, come on. Yeah, and they get direct hit on. That was awful.
Yeah. What? I mean, this show does.
I was waiting for something like that to happen because I kept thinking, at what point is a foxhole going to not protect them anymore? I knew that.
Well, it can't protect a direct hit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's supposed to protect you from shrapnel that goes across.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, nothing will do a direct hit. But yeah.
Neil McDonough to me he's not like a super famous actor now, but he's kind of one of my favorite character actors. But I had completely forgotten that he was in Band of Brothers, and so when I saw him the first time, I'm like, oh, that's Neil McDonough.
Yeah, and Donnie Wahlberg wasn't
he's Lipton
then. Yeah, he wasn't big then.
Yeah, definitely not big. He did a great job. So, okay, so we'll close off with this. So I think Mark, did you have something you wanted to share that you knew? You said you had something.
No, it was just my audition. It was my audition.
Oh, okay.
That I actually auditioned for it. I read the book for it.
Yeah.
And they gave me, they gave us a sort of directory of characters. So you got to see pictures of Winters as a young man. They give his bio, and then you read the scenes. But I did it with a shattered leg, so I couldn't go any further. That was my story.
So let's go around for final thoughts very quickly. Any final thoughts? Anything you didn't get to say that you wanted to say about this show?
I thought that Lieutenant Spears was an awesome character. He was as close as they came, as close as someone comes to being an actual superhero who's a real person. Mm. And there was just this one scene when Lieutenant Spears had to replace the guy that froze. I can't remember the guy's name, the other lieutenant. That was a terrible lieutenant.
Dyke.
And Dyke, yeah. And there was this one scene where Damian Lewis's Winter sends Lieutenant Spears in and he doesn't hesitate and he charges the field, and then you see them watching. Some part is something is completely blown up, and whereas normally it would mean a soldier is dead, Lieutenant Spears just jumps through the blow up, and he's like, there should have been like superhero music playing, because he just destroyed that scene.
Yeah,
I loved that.
He had a really great run.
Yeah,
the way he runs is really.
Yeah, I forgot. He was another one. But between he and Winters was the more human. Like, he was the RoboCop of the unit, and Winters was the more feeling guy. But he was definitely a very cool, interesting cat, man. He could have been a Ragnar Daniskold. I could see.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Final thoughts, Mark, Jennifer.
No, I think that this TV show should live on, and I hope many people in the younger generations get a chance to see it. Like one of the most beautiful things about it is that it integrates reality with the fictionalized storytelling, so that you actually see the men, the men in their at the end of their lives, basically telling the story that you get to you see it in flashback with characters. So it's I think it's a very important movie for young people to see today.
I think
Jennifer?
that's a great point, the integration of the reality with the fictional. And the only thing I didn't talk about was that I thought, and I said in the beginning, I thought it was probably one of the best plots that I've ever seen over, a series like this. And I think it's because it's almost as if Easy Company is its own character, because
Mhm.
its journey going from just terrible, running up the hill, dying, to their climb, their battles, their scars, losing people, being replaced. And you have Bastogne in the cold dark of night, like when you write a movie, you get everybody collapses into the dark of night, and then they rise up from that, and they actually end up at Ingalls Nest and in the Alps at the highest point where the Nazis met, and that's where they end. And like, what a journey. It's so beautiful. I just love the way that it's encapsulated.
That's a really
Sorry.
that's a really great visual. That's a really great way to tell that story, that they're in like the cold and dead, and then they end up high, at the highest point over everything. That's really great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed that and that you go and watch again, because assuming you've already seen it, Band of Brothers, it's definitely worth watching. So thank you, viewing room, and I'll see you all next time.
Thank you.